Have you ever read a story in the Bible that was triggering? That means it reminds you of things that you've experienced before, and those experiences weren't good. They were sad experiences and made you think about where was God and why didn't he stop it? Indeed, have you ever asked God those questions? Where were you and why didn't you? So many times I read the Bible and I'm asking those questions. Where were you? Why didn't you? How come? There is one such story in Judges chapter 19 that I want to talk about today, and just give some steps about what can happen next when this is happening. But before I go into that, if this is your first time watching this channel, my name is Joanna Daniel. I'm a counselor. I live in the UK, and I'm a founder of Wounds to Scars, where we work with adult survivors of childhood trauma and women who experience abuse. And we do that through conferences, retreats, and online courses. Our next course is the journey to freedom for survivors of sexual trauma, and it starts on the 23rd of August. We still have some spaces, and our next retreat is November 1 to 4 in the beautiful island of St. Lucia. All the details are below this video. So let's get into Judges chapter 19. Judges chapter 19 is really traumatizing, I'm going to say, very triggering. I remember one time I was at church and the pastor was preaching on it, and there was a woman who screamed and had to leave. She had to be taken out because they didn't give a trigger warning. So I can give a trigger warning at the beginning of this video, although I'm not going to go in detail and say the things and the content of Judges 19. But I'm going to invite you to go and read it. But I want you to watch this video first, because hopefully I want the next time that you read it, that you're reading it through a different lens, so you can see something else that you've never seen before. And if you've never read it and you're going to read it for the very first time, I want you to read it through those lenses so you can see something else, get something else from it. Because sometimes I wonder, why are these stories recorded in the Bible? What's the purpose of Judges 19? I mean, in the whole book of Judges, we see, Joshua settled the children of Israel in the land that God had promised, and they immediately turned away from him and started to worship in other gods and doing what the people of the land were doing. They weren't being the examples that they were supposed to be when, he took them out of slavery in Egypt and led them to the land that he had promised Abraham and the covenant that he made with Isaac. And so what Judges 19 reveals, and it's Judges 19 to 21, but we're focusing on Judges 19. What it reveals is just how humans, without God, we are depraved, and the things that we will do without him. But if you've ever wondered, so where was God when it hurts? Have you ever asked those questions? Where was God? Where were you, God, when I was going through the things that I was going through? Where were you? Why weren't you there to protect me and to look after me when I was going through these things? I ask those questions all the time. I ask God, where were you? Why didn't you? How come? Where is God? Where is God when it hurts? The story of Judges 19, as I said before, can be triggering when you read it. He went so far, when I'm reading it and I'm looking at all the players in the story, and I'm looking at all who were there, what did they do and what didn't they do? And I see over and over again where women weren't protected. That's what I saw in Judges 19, because I'm like, why didn't everybody fight? Why didn't everybody say, you're going to have to take all of us? Why didn't they afford her some protection? And I'm thinking of the man in Judges 19 is this man whose concubine left and went back home, and he went to get her. And her father engaged him and said, eat and stay another day and stay another day. And as I was reading it this morning again, I was wondering if the father was doing that because he just didn't want his daughter to leave again. And he wanted to keep her a bit longer. And so by delaying him, he could have her a little bit longer. I wonder if her safety was always at risk. And this was his way of keeping her. If her safety was always a problem, because as a concubine, what kind of life did she have in his house? She wasn't a wife, she wasn't number 1, 2, or 3. She wasn't really a concubine is not regarded. And so maybe that life, she wanted to go back home. And so she ran away and went home, and he went for her. And so when it came to this time where he was supposed to protect her, He didn't. So I'm thinking, why did you go all that way for somebody that you weren't prepared to protect? So maybe he just saw her as his property. She was his. And therefore, if you're my property, then you belong to me. Or maybe he paid a dowry. I don't know. Maybe those things happen, because sometimes those things happen in the Bible days. And so I'm thinking, you're going to make all that journey to go all that way for someone, and then you're not prepared to protect her. You were protecting her. And we were reading through the book of Judges 19 with the children. We're talking about it. And one of the children said, God wasn't there. And I agree with that. He wasn't there. He wasn't mentioned at all in that chapter. And you have to wonder, so then who was leading these people and what were they doing? So when I was speaking to them about this man and the lack of protection, I said, if somebody come here to hurt you, I'm going in front. I'm going to say, hurt me, don't hurt the children. And so when you love someone, you naturally want to protect them. But here were these men who were supposed to be looking after these women, and they didn't afford protection. And so what happened to her was gruesome. And, it was gruesome. And she died because of it. And so what happens, we see what happens next, but I'm thinking, I'm taking small comfort from what happens next, because I'm like, why aren't we protected? And we need more men who are willing to protect women, to stand up, to say, you're safe with me. And as long as you're with me, you're going to be safe. Because I think, who knows how the story would have panned out if protection had happened. So why did he go after her? Why did he set out? Why did he do all of these things? It wasn't love, clearly. It must have been just, you're my property, so you need to be with me. So then the next question is, and it's an automatic question, and I don't believe God is afraid of these questions. Where was he? Where was God? What was happening? Sometimes we when we go through things, we cannot place God. Like, we have to work to place him in the story. And I am not going to defend God. I can't speak on his behalf. I had to ask these questions when I was processing my own trauma. Where were you and why? And I believe that, as I said, God is not afraid of these questions. Where were you? Why didn't you stop it? I had a lot of questions. I had a lot of why questions. Where were you? Did you care? Kind of questions. Where were you kind of questions? How come kind of questions? Why me kind of questions? Did you care kind of questions? It was a process of asking those questions and going in search of the answers. So those questions can do two things. They can make you angry and go away from him, or they can make you curious and want to find out. Because we learn through church, growing up in church and hearing sermons, that he cares and that he's omnipresent, that he's everywhere. How come he wasn't there when I was being hurt? And as a Christian and wanting to live an authentic life, and an authentic Christian life means I'm not going to deny the questions, because they're there anyway. I can ask them and I can get answers from them. And part of why I do what I do is because I know that they're answers. I know that they're answers. So the where were you questions, where is God when it hurts? And Philip Yancey wrote a book about that. Many years ago I read it, and so I can't remember exactly all of the things. But where was he when it hurts? And when I was asking that question and going in search of God for myself around my pain, I found out where he was. And I wrote a poem after my journey, and I don't remember which book it's in right now, but it's in one of the materials that I wrote. Like, where were you? How come? Why didn't you? And as I was asking that question, and I said, go in search of answers. In search of answers for me is reading his word, looking at experiences, the experiences that I had, experiences of other people, listen to other people's experiences without glossing it over and without making excuses for him, because we don't need to make excuses for God, because God is God. And one of the books that particularly is impacting for me is the book of Job. When Job was ill, when Job went through what he went through, there's so much for us to learn from that book. And in the end, when God came to speak, what I noticed was that he didn't answer any of the questions that Job and his friends were asking. what he did was tell them about who he was. This is me. I am the creator. I'm the sustainer. Who does the ravens cry to when they are hungry? When I look at his majesty and his awesomeness, it makes me say like Job. Job said, I've heard about you by the hearing of the ears, but now my eyes have seen you. For me I've had this experience with you that I don't need to worry about where you were. I know you were there. I know you were right there. Even though this experience is painful, I know you didn't make it happen. I know that you didn't sanction it. You didn't stamp approve it. I know you're God, and I know you're everywhere and you can do anything, but I've seen you now. And what I saw as I went in search of him, not because anybody told me about him, but because I needed to know him, was his consistency. He is consistent. I saw his heart. And there's a beautiful song I was listening to yesterday, and I don't remember who sings it, that says, when you can't see his hand, trust his heart. What is his heart for us? Unfiltered through our traumas, unfiltered through anybody, religious leaders or otherwise, who spoke of him but didn't live him. What is his heart? And you can get to know someone by studying them, by being with them, spending time with them. That's how we get to know people. And so his heart is tender and compassionate, is abounding in goodness and truth. I know that he didn't make it. So when I read Judges 19 and is triggered by it and see the extent of the harm that must have happened to that woman and the extent of the trauma and the fallout of it, and the other people in the story and where they were positioned and what they didn't do. And when other people in my story and your story and where they were positioned on what they didn't do can make us wonder if anybody cares. It can make us wonder, does anybody care? Will anybody care for me? Will anybody hear me when I cry? Because when I did, nobody came. When I had this need, nobody met it. If you're omnipresent, why weren't you present there? And one of the poems that I write when I was at the end of my healing, and I wrote, where were you? My mind went to the cross, and it's like, where was God when Jesus was being crucified? He was there. He was there. And I know the purposes are different, and I'm not comparing them. But for me, it gives me an idea of his understanding of pain. And the last week of Jesus's life gave me an idea of the understanding of his pain and my pain, and where they both sit in this grand scheme of things and this world that we live in, and the way evil sometimes operates, and the things that happen that we just can't explain and we don't have an understanding for, and how faith requires us to just trust that there is a purpose and there's an outcome that is going to be for our good. And I mentioned the process earlier, because to get the outcome that is going to be for our good means that we have to do the process. And part of the process is asking questions and going in search of answers and doing the work of healing. For example, when we're triggered by different things, even stories in the Bible. See, God's love is unchanging. And well, in our book club this week, we're reading the chapter, and it talks about the grace that we're all given. We're stewards of God's grace. And that really stayed with me, being stewards of grace. I'm like, I've read that verse hundreds of times, never saw it in the light that I did until this weekend. And it stayed with me all day yesterday. I talked about it continually with my husband, because that's how I do things. When I find something that is deep and meaningful and I know it's going to create change, I'm a verbal reflector, so I'm constantly talking about it. And so being steward of his grace means that we have a measure of grace that we steward. And we steward it the way we steward our money, where we look after our money. We make sure we save, make sure we do things. So we're stewarding grace just the same. So we have grace and we're getting it every day. We have to steward it. That means we have to give it to other people. And so if we don't, though, process and heal, we're not able to steward this grace as much as we could. Because we won't know that we're overseers of grace, that we have it, and that the grace that we have through him can heal us. It can help to heal us. It will go into the places of our pain. He will sit with you in your wounded places when we open it up to him and allow him. Now, he steward his grace through people. He uses me, he uses you to steward his grace. So when we're asking, where were you? And even though he was there and he didn't stop it and it happened, and we're sitting with the level of pain that we're sitting with when we experience trauma like that, he says, I have given some people grace that they're stewarding, and that is going to go into your wounded places if you'll just allow them to sit with you in your wounded places. And I'm going to use the community to heal you. I'm going to use this method to heal you so that this thing that happens to you don't hamper and take over the rest of your life. If you will allow people to steward the grace that they've experienced, to use it as a means to help you to heal from that thing that triggers you when you read my words, and when you struggle to sleep, and when you struggle with your parenting, and when you struggle in romantic relationships, and when you struggle in interpersonal relationships, and when you're struggling with the depression and the anxiety, when you're struggling, I've given some people grace that they're going to steward. And then when you get yours, I want you to steward it to others too. That's why I do the groups that I do. I mean, as I said, it just came home to me this weekend about being steward of his grace, and I am willing to steward it, to use it abundantly, because I get mine every day. And so I wanted to talk about this because, we don't have to be afraid of anything that we read in the Bible. We can ask questions. And if we read things that are so aligned to our story that it triggers us, we don't have to be afraid of it. We can ask questions, we can sit with it, and we can heal through it. I take women on a journey of healing in the Journey to Freedom group that gives them freedom from this level of trauma as we steward grace to each other in a space where 6 people are, so we're healing together. So I'm inviting you to that. We start on the 23rd of August, and the details are below this video. But wherever you go to be stewarded by grace, wherever you go to get the healing that for the trauma that you have experienced, I want you to know that healing is possible, that it's okay. You can ask questions. But I got to know the consistent God, that his heart for me is one of love, that he didn't cause it to happen. And because of his grace, that I'm healed enough to help other people. His love is unchanging. It has never changed, and it never will. He is willing to sit with you with the questions and to help you through it. So that you can find healing and peace, and so that this thing doesn't have to disrupt the rest of your life in the way it has the period before. Thank you for joining me. Have an amazing day.